Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm pleased to have with me here today on the Law Subscribed podcast, the one and only from the Kennedy Mile Report, Dennis Kennedy. Dennis Kennedy, welcome to Law Subscribed.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. So for those of you who are not listeners of the Legal Talk Network, like I have been for, I can't believe it, like the last 10 years, you'll recognize even just that little bit of the dulcet tones of Dennis Kennedy from the Kennedy Mile Report, which has been going on for a long time, that podcast. But Dennis, just in case my listeners haven't come across your stuff before, they will be after this episode, you go ahead and give yourself a little introduction.
Yeah, so I'm currently the director for the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State University. I also teach an adjunct class at the University of Michigan Law School, and I live in Ann Arbor, which means people always ask me about, which means I have to keep the colors of my clothes straight depending on where I'm at on any given day. I practiced law for about almost 40 years before retiring and then unretiring into academia. So I was at a couple of firms and then spent a good chunk of my career as a technology lawyer in the law department of MasterCard, where I worked on various technologies, especially our newest technologies in our innovation efforts, and then decided to retire. And then I said, as I said, unretire. So that's sort of like the legal part of my career. And then I've sort of written, spoken about the application of technology in the law practice for many years. So was one of the first lawyers with the website in 1995, one of the first lawyers with the blog. And then Tom and I are rapidly approaching the 18th anniversary of our podcast. So I've been around for a while, written some books and stuff, and have the interest in both the application of technology in the practice, and now even more so in the application of technology to the delivery of legal services, and I would also say law-related services.
Yeah, well, then it's no surprise after that bit, especially why I've asked you to be on the podcast. And thanks again for coming on. And now between you and having Carolyn Elephant on as a special guest for LinkedIn Live, I think that's two of the first attorneys who had blogs and websites on the show. And then it's not live at the time of recording, but I had Corinne Munsterman on, who's teaching Gen AI at one of the Texas law schools. And so you're our second person in academia on the show. So pleased to have you here. I'd like to talk a little bit of legal education if we have time for it, but as it relates to technology. But before we even get started, I have a question for you about the Kennedy Mile Report, which is, when are you going to change the intro? Because it still says Web 2.0, and we're at least at Web 2.5, if not 3 at this point.
Yeah, we thought about that. I raised this thing with Tom about we should go out there and use, find a generative AI music service and do like find some new intro music that's a little bit more customized to what we're doing, and then redo that intro. But it's kind of, it's on the list. But yeah, and then the weird thing is about the intro too. For us, the only time I ever hear it or I listen to pieces of the podcast, it's like most podcasts, it's either 1.5 or double speed. So the intro is like super weird because it's speeded up. But yeah, we have thought about that because our musical tastes have changed as well. But I think if we did it again, we would take a completely different approach to how we did that intro. But you're right. It's, we worked on it at the beginning. Mm-hmm. We conceived of the podcast as a show with this intro and outro and, spots for ads and segments and stuff like that. But once we got it into place, we've changed other aspects of the show. But the intro, we've just never got around to. But it's a good point.
Yeah, the intro is fine. I just think how it says Web 2.0, you guys talk about some of the most cutting edge technology that's available. And Web 2.0 is a little bit of a throwback. So I just, if it's somebody's first time listening, I'm just thinking, they're hearing Web 2.0. It's like, well, these guys are still in Web 2.0. They're not in Web 3.0, but you are. You totally are, which is why I'm glad to have you here today. So, Dennis, the main reason I asked you to come on, despite all the great conversations you're having on the Kennedy Mile Report, is you wrote this blog post December 4th, 2023 on the LegalTechHub.com blog. You had a guest post there. And I thought it was fantastic because it's titled "Innovating Alternative Fee Arrangements," and these are conversations that are happening now. But in particularly someone like yourself, who's both working with students on technology adoption in law and everything else you're doing, I think it's very poignant. But then when you just Google your name and alternative fees, you get a blog post going back on, this is on your site, DennisKennedy.com, going back to 2005, October 7th, 2005, Pat Lamb on alternative fees. And you're quoting him in there, finding this interesting, so many years ago, almost, 2 decades ago. The real solution is abandoning hourly rates. So, so I guess my question for you there, although I would love your just general comments on that, is Gen AI, is this finally the thing that's showing lawyers that you can't, like, it's just not profitable? And first of all, it's always more profitable to not bill time, I think, but now it's like the technology makes it just simply less profitable. What are your thoughts on this 20-year period?
Well, I would go back even further than that. So back in around 1990, I was working at a firm doing estate planning work, and I put together like an application for document assembly, as it was called at the time, now document automation. And I got it to work, and I was really happy. And then I realized that back in those days, to put together, and we were doing it was complex estate planning. So to do a really good first draft of a will where you started to customize took bizarrely like 5 hours worth of legal time. And it was legitimate time, but it's weird to think of now. And then I did this application, and you answered a set of questions, and in less than 5 minutes, I was at the same stage. And it was amazing. But then I said, I have these billable hour requirements, kind of shot myself in the foot, but it's a benefit to the client. And that made me realize that anytime you're looking at technology in legal, you need to think of business model as well. So, and then there are different times in my career where I would have a client who would joke about like, if you're doing these documents, all you really do is push a button and change the names in it. And one time I had a client do that, and we laughed. And then I said, that expectation is real. Mm-hmm. And the reality is kind of real. Shouldn't the practice be something where the standard docs are free? And that as a lawyer, we're not selling docs, but we're selling advice and all the other things that people are happy to pay for. And would they even pay us more? And so I've looked at the alternative fees, and, and that's how I do things now. You may have run into my friend Matt Holman from time to time, who's been really doing a lot of things in this sort of alternative fees. And there's a bunch of people out there, and they're used so much in other areas that it just makes sense. And I think that lawyers, we tend to think, what we're doing is we're selling hours. And that's what we learn. And we don't look at the business model, what clients want, and we don't look at profitability at all. It's just like hours. And so you say like, well, some of the innovative stuff that law firms have done and lawyers have done, like Pat Lamb is over the years, is say, let's look at what we're doing. And even if we're billing a lot of hours, if it's not profitable, why are we doing that? Like what makes sense? And, so I think that Gen AI is just one more development that puts emphasis on this to say, okay, so what is it we're actually providing? What are our clients' expectations? What is it they're really paying for? And what are they happy to pay for? And what are they not happy to pay for? And so that's how I look at it. I don't know, because lawyers have done a great job about keeping the billable hour in place, and not looking to see how other professions do it. So I don't know that this is going to be the thing that changes everything. I've always sort of felt like if you talk to lawyers and anytime they're talking about paying for services on the hour, they totally freak out. It's like, I don't want to do that. I want to know, I want to have an estimate. I want to have a cap. I want to have all these things, except for what they're charging clients. And if you talk to clients, they're just like, oh my God, like, I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what's cost. It could cost like thousands and thousands of dollars versus what might I do using this? And I think Gen AI is really attractive to me in the subscription model space, right? Because then you can say, I can offer this subscription to people, and I may even create like a Gen AI little app for clients to ask simple questions and do other things. But I can sort of deliver more things easier, like checklists, summaries, those sorts of things. And that can be
There's
really helpful.
parallels. There's parallels to the should I just offer these docs for free and I could make this Gen AI tool as a benefit? Because when you said should I offer these docs for free, I'm thinking, well, you could offer them on a subscription. Like, what about like a subscription to just get access to documents? And part of that subscription could also be if you want a low tier, just access to docs. If you want the next tier up, well, now you get access to docs and the lawyer to help you customize. And then if you want the next tier up, we could do even more customizations, right? And I don't offer that for my particular firm because I transitioned from litigation to transactional. I didn't have the docs, but for lawyers who have the documents, and I've had Jim Hart on the show, and that's kind of what we talked about because he had separate businesses. He had a business where he sold docs and then his law firm. And we talked about how he could combine those two using a subscription because he was already using a membership model for entrepreneurs in a separate thing. So like, how do you combine all three of those businesses profitably? And I think I'm going to have him back on the show later to talk about that. But the same thing is true with Gen AI, just like you were saying, where I can offer a subscription for like maybe just the access to a lawyer's Gen AI that is on their, part of your subscription benefits. And then if I want to pay for that next tier up, I could get attorney eyes on my documents and attorney eyes on my questions. And it's not a substitute for legal advice, but as long as you say, hey, this is legal information through a legal trained Gen AI, and you should rely on it accordingly. I feel like that's, this is latent legal market stuff. This is, being able to serve that huge market. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think you're absolutely right. And that's at least how I would go about doing it.
Yeah, and I think Gen AI gives you the ability to personalize. So you could say, again, to go back to estate planning, because usually that's a kind of one and done thing in most cases. But if you said, what I could do with Gen AI is I have this information on the client and their estate planning documents, and and I could generate something that's personalized to them through AI. And like you said, that could be part of this ongoing subscription. And there would be other things really, suggestions that are related to you. Might be able to identify, from birthday information that you've had a child, now older than a distribution age in a trust. And you could say, like,
Right.
do you want to rethink that? And it's not going to be work on your part as a lawyer and
Right.
as a client. I'm probably going to be able to happy to pay like a couple $100 a year,
Right.
for that, or maybe even more. And then you have that relationship. So it's not a one and done. You go like, oh, here's my lawyer's looking out for me. They personalize this, or they're giving more information. And then when you have the subscription model, then they're saying like, oh, you know what? I'm okay with the will stuff, but this other thing came up. Can you help me with that? And so it becomes this, helpful form of, you're both helping and you're marketing at the same time.
Yeah, Matthew Burgess, an attorney out of, I believe, Australia, who's been on the show, but his episode isn't live yet, though soon at the time of recording here. He does like $100. I think he offers another package, but $100 for an annual subscription, like check-in for his estate planning clients. And, he's in a totally different jurisdiction, but there's no reason why U.S. estate planning attorneys couldn't charge $100 or $200 for a once-a-year check-in on your estate plan. Because it's probably, I think it's worth it. It's like, try to put yourself in the shoes of your customer as being client centric, right? And so like, I would pay $100 or $200 to have an expert look at my estate plan, ask me a few questions about any changes in my life to be like, oh no, you're good. Like sometimes there's value to not having to do anything. And that could be worth $100 or $200 just for the peace of mind, for the annual check-in. And then when there is work to do, you have a flat fee or something that, and maybe if they're a subscriber, they get a discount on that. Let's update your will or your trust, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, huge opportunity.
yeah, because a really good, personal lawyer will, has always known these things to go like, oh, I know your parent is now, is now 85. Let's think about, their situation
Right.
and whether we need to do something on that. Or like I said, birthdays, other changes. And I think that's so much better than saying like, here's like a general email on some development in estate planning law or tax law that nobody really understands and probably doesn't apply to them. And that's the other thing that Gen AI could. I could kind of say, like, here's this module for a newsletter.
Mhm.
And then I use the Gen AI to assemble something that feels more personalized to what people are doing instead of just say, like, here's this thing about, how do you pass on your commercial shopping centers, and like most of your clients are going to go like, yeah, I will, why am I getting this, so.
Right. Although, like I'm thinking about from like maybe less so for like attorney to client, but like attorney to attorney, like it's a little bit dystopic of a thought, but like, my Gen AI will automatically generate some long letter or document or communication, send it to the other attorney. Their AI will just summarize it for them so they don't have to read the whole thing, and so like, are we like, how, like, who are we like, how are we communicating in the future? So it does, I'm kind of concerned a little bit about that, but I'm still going to leverage and use these tools. But still, at some point, you're going to be reading it. I use like a news aggregator called Volv, VOLV, and I know they use Gen AI to take news articles and make them like things you could read in like 12 seconds or something, like
Right.
list like 2 or 3 sentences. And so I'm already consuming news that way. And if I want to click on the article, I could click on the article, I could read the article, right? But yeah, it's just one of these things where we'll see how far it goes. Like Turtle, like Gen AI all the way down,
Oh no,
Uh,
definitely. And now I just saw this thing yesterday, a webinar, which I've kind of went deeper into the math than I was in a way prepared to go, but it was fascinating to see what's happening. And we have this notion that we have these sort of human supervision and like, testing what the AI is coming up with and making sure it's relevant and all of that. And sort of mathematically, they figured out some ways they can get as good or even better results without any human supervision by changing the formulas behind it. And so there's this notion out, and so I'm teaching an AI and law class at Michigan State, but so we've been talking these things, but there's sort of this notion in law that we'll be able to figure out what's in the AI tools and kind of take them apart and, figure out what's going on and change them. And the AI companies are, figuring out ways to optimize them without using humans. And so we could reach this point where the outcome is desirable for us, but we have no idea what is going on.
it reminds me of, have you ever read the short story by Isaac Asimov called The Last Question? I,
I don't remember that title.
so it's the multivac. It's like they ask like like basically it was Google or Gen AI before it existed because it was written so long ago, where the two engineers are like asking like on a New Year's, like this multivac, this like super powered AI machine. Of course, back then, he wrote that it took up like the size of a football field, that computer, because the way that the things
Mhm.
work, computers worked back then. And it like printed out on like a piece of paper like the answer to questions, right? And he says in the short story how it's gotten so complicated and it's built upon itself that people just don't know how it works anymore. But it can answer any question you asked it. So they asked it how do you reverse entropy? And it couldn't answer the question then. And then like the short story goes into the future like millennia. And like like they always ask the next version, like the humans as they colonize space, hey, they're just like having breakfast. Hey, multivac, or that version of it. Like, how do you reverse entropy? It's like still compiling data, insufficient data at this time. Can answer the question, later.
Mhm.
And like generations, millennia, and eventually, like anyway, I don't want to spoil the ending. It's a short story, but that, but it, like I the first time I got a Google Home, which is like almost a decade ago now, like it made me think of that story. And so I asked my Google Home, I was like, sorry if anyone is listening to this on speaker, hey Google, how do you reverse entropy? And it said like insufficient data at this time. Like they programmed in that Easter egg. And then with Gen AI coming out too, I'm like, I have to put this into Gen AI and see if OpenAI programmed this in. Like they made a canned response, but it didn't. Unfortunately, I was very disappointed to see that it didn't have an Easter egg with ChatGPT.
Long, yeah, it's too far down on their task list.
Right.
I heard this interesting thing that said that the estimate now is like 60% of software code is being written by Gen AI right now, which has lots of implications, not the least of which is security. If we don't really understand what's going on, in that code, but it just works, then are there security vulnerabilities in there that we aren't going to be able to pick up?
Yeah, and with Gemini now, I know that when you sign in, like they're like, here, code, like we'll help you like build code right now.
Mhm.
So we'll see. And for not non-coders like myself, I wonder what I'll be able to, if I could just use Write and Bard, like ask it, I would tell it what I want to design and code, and then get the like what are the right prompts for me to put into Gemini to get the code that I need for it, and just see if I could code without having any knowledge whatsoever about how to code. So I've been planning to
Yeah,
play around with
I
that.
I think that's I think that's getting to be close. I mean, obviously simple things are better, but there and then typically it won't do this thing. Like what I'd like to have happen is that I write this little program that goes out and pulls stuff from like all the different places and then like prioritizes things for me and pulls them all into one place. So and summarizes. So I just have like what they used to call the daily me, that I read that tells me exactly what it is I want. And you go like, and you're thinking like, oh, the concept is simple, but the programming probably for that is difficult. And what would break down is like, even if I understood the program, I wouldn't know like how to make it run at all. Like what does it have to do to actually run? And what would it run on? So yeah, so I think it is interesting, but the Gen AI does abstract by a level up to what we need to know. So with my students, I'm talking about like you don't need to understand the details of what's happening. You need to have like an understanding of what happens. So you need to know what the questions ask, but you want to understand what people see, what people are doing, what they see as the benefits. Because lawyers are great about, identifying risk, and you can do that all day long. But my feeling is like you want to understand what people see as the benefits, because that's what's going to be helpful to them. And when I was at MasterCard and we were doing new things, you don't want to be the lawyer who said, "Oh, we're introducing this new pay at the table thing of, next week, and we have all this stuff out there, and we forgot to bring it to you. So can we do it?" And you don't want to be like the no person on that. You want to like, how can we possibly do that? So
Right, right. And I think it's important, I'm sure you're teaching this to your students, is like what Gen AI is doing with how these large language models work is it's just predicting what's the most probable next word. And it's not a source of truth like we think of maybe some other like legal research tools finding like the case, right? So I think it's really important when you're using these tools to realize that. And also, I mean, I'm a parent of a young child now. She's 3. And like, it's amazing the similarities between these little large language model, these organic large language models, because sometimes they guess the wrong next word, because that's kind
Mhm.
of how we learn language, right?
Yeah, there's this great story was in the MIT Technology Review last week. So I think that would be like February 1st. And somebody, because people have crazy ideas that sometimes work, decided to strap like a video camera to the head of a baby and then gather all the data of how they learn language. And it improved the results on the AI
I believe it.
that they were working on. I've talked to people, and you can probably verify this too with the 3-year-old, that the idea of like having a small child wear like a little helmet with a video camera on it is challenging, right? So
Very challenging. You're gonna have to reward them with a lot of chocolate chips or a lot of TV time to get them to keep that on. I'm just
yeah,
yeah,
there are interesting things because it's learn, there's this weird because it's so statistical and I think what's interesting for me is it's giving you this sort of average, sort of expected what I would call like most expected results or most likely results, which can take you in different directions. So if you do something like legal research, right, where you're saying like, oh, there is some definitive answer that I can get to, it actually weirdly almost seems like the wrong AI, like the generative AI seems like the wrong AI tool for that. So I
Right.
use
It's
the,
like oh, go ahead. I'll let you give
yeah, I
your
was going to
example.
say, I
Yeah.
use the example in my class that generative AI is good for one thing, but I wouldn't want to use generative AI in a self-driving car. Totally the wrong AI, you
Right.
know,
Yeah. It's like,
and
if you have a nail and legal research helps you hammer that nail, legal research is a hammer. Gen AI is like a screwdriver. Could you kind of maybe hammer in that nail with a screwdriver? Well, you could kind of brute force it, but it's not going to be the best outcome, right?
right. And then, yeah, and it's like, yeah, the screwdriver will work if I turn it around, right, and use the handle of it as a hammer, but it's not going
But
to be a
it's
good
not.
hammer.
Yeah, it's not going to go in straight. It's going to be damaged at the end. But I think that's one of the ways to think about it. And what I would much rather do is take Gen AI, have like I've narrowed down the cases, maybe to 2 cases that are very similar to my case, and I'll put them into a Gen AI solution that has a large enough context window so that I can say, synthesize these cases. And that's not a good prompt, but I'm just sort of shortening it for the sake of this conversation, and get a synthesis from those two, and like that's a good use of it, and then come in and say, okay, yeah, I see that now. That's a really good, that gives me as long as I find the Gen AI for that type of stuff is directionally correct. It's not always perfect, but it helps me think about things, and it maybe helps illuminate some things that I would have missed if I were to just read it, and I'll get there so much faster.
Right. And I think it also lets you know when you as the human need to jump back in. So it's great at generating ideas, but you still have to edit those. Some of the most interesting things that I find in legal are, things like, okay, so I don't ask it to write the brief because I'm going to be better at that. And but what I can do is if I have an opening argument, I have a brief, I have a memo or something, I can say, you know, assume you're an expert on classic principles of persuasion and other things like that, and make recommendations to make this brief more persuasive, or identify the strong arguments and the weak arguments based on standard logical principles, and identify my opponent's weakest argument, and then strategically then I say what I do as a litigator is I spend a lot of time just hammering their weakest arguments, you know, and then I can do things like say, based on if I have historical information on this judge, what types of arguments or approaches are most likely, to work with them. And it may or may not be right, but it, like you said, directionally, it gives me a good starting place, and it's so much better than just doing like a seat of the pants. Like, here's what might work.
Right. And I think I want to highlight what you just said. It may or may not be right. And when you think about what's the future of what lawyers do, what's the value that we have to our clients, our legal training and expertise, it's being able to answer that question, right? It's being able to look at the output and say, this is right or it's wrong. And I think that's still valuable, and we could sell that, but that takes less time. So billing time is just one of these things where if that's where my expertise is if that's my greatest value, is knowing what prompts to prompt and being able to analyze the output as correct or incorrect, then I think that just takes less time. And so I could now make more money if I redesign the way that I'm delivering those legal services or pricing that service, which brings me back to the article
Right.
and about alternative fees and how this wraps into alternative fees. So was this kind of what was the impetus to writing that blog post, or what was, because you do, of course, mention ChatGPT and AI in there, and you even give a suggested prompt at the
Yeah.
end of it
So
for how to come
yeah,
up with an alternative fee. When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so for Legal Tech Hub, which I think is a great resource, and I love what Nikki Shaver is doing there, is that I write a regular column on law department innovation. So I wanted to bring into the conversation the perspective of in-house counsel and law departments. And so in that role, you're sort of both a deliverer of legal services and a consumer of legal services. And so I sort of think, well, we always say that we don't want to pay, like law firms come and they say like, oh, good news, our hourly rates are only going up 15% this year, but we'll give you a discount of 3%. So effectively it's 12%, And so usually when people negotiate terms, they're usually looking at discounts rather than, like a full blown sort of different approach. And part of it is that people aren't aware of all the different models out there for alternative fees. And so the idea of this article was like, if I were doing innovation in a law department, I know that the CFO and the C-suite are complaining about the legal spend. It's like the one thing it's unpredictable, they don't have control over, and they don't understand why. And if you just say like, oh, legal services are unique, like everything is unique, that really doesn't carry much weight. So it's kind of like, if in a law department I'm doing innovation, what might I be able to do looking at the projects I have, the firms I use, the sort of approaches that work both inside and outside law? Can I come up with actual different ways to do these things where I incentivize firms and to work with me? And so I said, what if we just turn that rather into just this sort of administrative thing, but an actual innovation project? Like, this is a goal of ours, to get control typically over legal spend in creative ways by using alternative fees. And so we could do this thing where we say we do design thinking and we bring people together and stuff, but the AI becomes interesting to kind of generate that list of ideas and see things that make the most sense to us before we go out and have those conversations with our law firms who are going to say, we're unique and we can offer you like another 2% discount, and the difficulty is that you're saying like, do I fire law firms that won't come into my new regime or not, which it can be really difficult. If you're doing something where you're doing what they call panel conversions, where you're taking and reducing the number of law firms you have, you can drive some of that. But I saw it as an interesting problem that, it was originally in the idea of like, oh, this is administrative. It's a pain for general counsel to be called on the carpet in the executive meeting and say like, I don't know why we're spending so much money with this firm or whatever, and say like, this is one approach to kind of ease the pains, to have the law department show it's on the same page with the other business leaders, and then actually drive more business model change than efficiency change, but you would get some efficiency change as well. And then kind of drive the right work to the right people, right firms as well. So that was the idea, was to say, like, let's take the alternative fee approach and flip the usual approach to say, like, well, how might I, as a practicing lawyer, get my clients to say, how, as a client, might I get my outside firms to go to the alternative fee things in creative ways that make sense for both of us?
That is, I think, really important, and it's also really hard. I don't know. This episode might air before it. I'll figure it out. But I just interviewed Bill Jostin with the TR Institute, and we talked about this too, because they have a lot of data on like GCs hiring, the big law firms, and it's complicated, right? Because they have all these metrics and efficiencies, built in for the billable hour, and there's this sunk cost fallacy of,
Right.
well, we have all these people hired, we built all these spreadsheets, or paid for all this software on like reducing billable time or managing that billable time. And so he said the same thing, like it needs to come from the clients, but it's hard to convince them that it needs to come from the client side, right? And in my experience, actually practicing using the subscription model and automation and Gen AI and all that is, I'm trying to serve the latent legal market, but I'm not going to say no to an institutional client because, of course, I need the business, right? And for everyday people or small business owners who have never hired a lawyer before because they're not affordable at the billable hour, or at least they might be affordable, but you don't know because you can't budget for it because you don't have pricing certainty. If they've never actually paid a lawyer by the billable hour and they don't know that, they're just like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to pay subscription or recurring because that's how I pay for all my other stuff, right? But it's the institutional clients who really love not getting charged an unknown amount 60 days after they got the legal services that maybe didn't even help solve their problem.
Right.
They appreciate it more than anyone else, even though I think it has such incredible potential to serve this latent legal market. These institutional clients like love it. Once they get over that hump of, so I'm not going to get like a list of all the things you did and how long it took so I could see exactly what you did. Well, no, because we're not focused on input. We're focused on output. We're focused on, did we solve the problem or did we avoid the problem, right? Because that's, you can't charge as much for problem avoidance as you can for problem solving, but it's still valuable, right?
Well, yeah, it's a different value proposition. And then I think the important thing is this notion of predictability, right? So if you said, you're going to do this for me, and here's, the deliverables, here's the outcome, and it's $1 million versus we can do this on a billable hour basis, and the range it could be is from 500,000 to 5 million. Probably you're going to take the $1 million with, where you're agreed on the outcome, instead of saying like, let's just run the hours and see what happens. And like, based on our experience, it's probably going to be around $1 million, but it could go much higher. And you're like, yeah, it's like, like if I took my car in to be repaired and they said, we're going to work on this, we're going to do it by the hour, you totally freak out. If you go like, oh, it needs a transmission replaced and that's $1,200, you go like, that's fine. No. And and I'm going to get it later today and I can drive home. That's like amazing. But if you said, we're going to work on it as long as it takes, and it'll be like, $100 an hour or whatever, you go
and by the way, if you drive away and your car breaks down right away, too bad, because we spent the time working on it. So,
exactly.
You owe us, and we're going to take you to court. Oh, and by the way, we have a monopoly on car repair. So good luck repairing your car anywhere else that's not paid this way.
So, right.
Yeah.
Are we, here's the fee for this. We put in all these hours, and the verdict was only $500,000, even though you thought that, the plaintiff didn't really have a case. So it's a win. Then you're going like, wait, I'm paying $500,000 plus, $800,000 in fees. It doesn't feel like a win to me, so.
So I do want to be sensitive to time. I don't know if you have a hard stop or not, because we only have in the calendar. I have more time. But
yeah, I have more time as well.
Okay. So I want to ask you about something that you guys talk about all the time, that I was first introduced to this concept listening in on the podcast. And I think it's applicable also in this space of subscription legal service is a potential value. And that's this concept of the second brain and just, storing all of your stuff that you want to remember somewhere. I know you guys talk about Notion being sort of the leading place right now. I know Airtable is a thing that some people use. There's all these different things. And now with Gen AI, I feel like it's easier to like plug in an AI to that, however you store the second brain. And if it could ingest that and trade on that, and now you could just ask a Gen AI about what you've stored in your second brain, that could be a super valuable thing. And where I think that comes into the subscription model and where it works well. So friend of the show, Kim Bennett, started the company Fidoo Legal, which helps law firms launch subscription and flat fee firms. They put this as one of their first product offerings that lawyers could help give to clients, and that is the knowledge base. Because when you're subscribing to something, that's an immediate value. So like when my knowledge base is very slim because I'm a true solo, though I've used some Gen AI to help me create some things and refined it. It helps. But that's like a subscription benefit. And when you're thinking about how to price your subscription model and what are the subscription benefits, just access to a knowledge base itself can have value. So that becomes an earned fee. That helps with the reasonableness of what you're charging and is it earned upon receipt because they get access to this knowledge base. Well, now imagine they get access to this Gen AI that's trained on the knowledge base and they could ask questions about it. So I kind of see like that solution could solve both the second brain problem and be a really good subscriber benefit. So we don't have to talk about the subscriber benefit because you're doing the second brain stuff. So I still think the outcome's the same. That's just for my audience. So what have you been looking into anything like this for your second brain project?
Well, so I've been doing a couple of things. So in Notion, which is sort of like a really great visual database tool that's super easy to use. So think of like Wikipedia, but like so much easier to use. That well, once you learn it, right?
Yeah,
But it has some AI built into it, and it's just like you can click a button and put in a column in the table that says AI summary, and so if you have something, you have a document, it will like do the AI summary, and it'll be right next to you, and that becomes searchable to you. I'm starting to put in more notes, and I'm terrible at note taking, as many people are. So I found lately is that, and this is like where AI helps you, where you're at 0% anyway. So almost anything will help you. So I say,
right.
well, I read this book, and now I have a prompt that I use that says, summarize in this structured way this book and like the key points and the action steps. It's done by AI. I don't really read it. I throw it into Notion, and then it potentially becomes searchable for me to come up in other contexts. So I usually think of second brain as this personal knowledge management, but you could say it can also be like a practice knowledge management, but super lightweight, where you say like, oh, here's some things I learned about this client. Here's how long it took me to do this. What's the average amount of time I spend on these things? What are the outliers? Like what should I throw out of that? I had a friend who has an IP firm and he noticed that in the first quarter, their trademark projects from clients went way up. And so they did a little research into it. What they found was like at the beginning of the year, people with small business said, I need to get that trademark thing taken care of. And so what they did was they changed their marketing and they changed their staffing for the first quarter, based on that. And so it's like, you need to get that information into something, like what I call the second brain. And then you say, okay, then how would I use it in ways that are actionable? And I think that, as I get older, I'm kind of like simple questions, right? It's like, what are the simple questions? What is it that and what would help me the most? It's like super simple. And then, in the notion of sort of KPIs and, other things like that, what are the measures that might really help me? And you say, like, why am I spending so much time on this? Why did I do this? And I feel like I didn't make any money off of it. Like, would it make sense for me to, I see the clients are asking this question and I keep telling them that that's not something I do. Maybe that's an indicator that I should do it. It's related to what it is. And then I think what's really important, and I have a note right in front of me that says this, is maybe I should think about using generative AI to on things that I don't or can't bill for anyway. So I
Right.
think that that becomes part of it where you say, like, why am I doing these things that I just write off all the time anyway? And then I'm working even more hours and not collecting for any of that. So that's this notion. If I can start to get something that's easy to throw stuff in, and I don't worry about how complete it is. I just say it's helping me to some extent. And I love your word directional. It's like it's surfacing something that I could explore, or it tells me like, oh, here's an experiment I might try. So when I was doing estate planning, many years ago, we do these complex documents like 30, 40 pages long. And I felt our innovation, I was in St. Louis at the time, our innovation in the St. Louis market was that we started to do summaries for every one of those documents. And then uh, when the first kind of graphics programs came out, we did charts. And so my mentor and my partner at the time would say, we do these complex documents that nobody can understand or read. And then we give them these summaries that they sort of can read and understand. And then we give them like 2 pages of like charts with arrows and boxes, and they totally love it, and and it really was the case. And that's sort of this Gen AI concept too, is like if I could do there's this great customer benefit to that, and they liked working with us for that. But now you can just generate that automatically, not pay for it, or not charge for it. And then you can generate the cover letter. So you don't want to do like the 12-page single space cover letter that lawyers are known for that nobody can read, and say like, oh, given this client and what I know about them, can I put this in a language that they would find really helpful with bullet points, all those sorts of things. And so those I think are the types of things that if you once you start something, that is kind of this simple, lightweight knowledge management tool with the idea saying I'm both collecting and I'm trying to pull something actionable about it, but I don't need to like boil the ocean or get everything right. I just need, as you said, directionality or what's the next experiment to run.
Yeah, and my hope for this type of tool is it gives the client an answer right away that it may be kind of like it clarifies that, hey, don't act on and rely on this if you could avoid it, because human eyes haven't been on this yet, but it will. Sometimes speed matters, and I'm only one person, so I can't help every client at the exact same time. But this will help these clients more than them just Googling it or using some free like ChatGPT on the market tool that's not trained or limited to legal related things. And then I can get human eyes on it, and it will take less time for me to get to that end result with them than if we just started from scratch, two humans together. If they are able to query this knowledge base about things, right? And so Notion, when I was first getting started, I looked at Notion as a place I should do my knowledge base from, and I never used the tool before. When you get it, it's just kind of like a blank space.
Right.
It's a blank
Exactly.
canvas. There's templates and there's other things. And I was like, you know what? I'm already learning how to use all this other technology to start a law practice. I don't need to use Notion in the beginning. In hindsight, I wish I would have, because now they've incorporated AI. That's actually great to know that you don't have to. The fewer tools I have to cobble together with duct tape and APIs and Zapier and Make, the better. So I'm my takeaway is I'm going to look at Notion following this conversation. I think that could be a really good tool. Starting to wrap up here, because I knew this was going to happen. We've basically covered only like 10% of what I had hoped to cover during the interview. So we'll have to have you back in the future. But I do want to ask you about it. It's related to like the future of legal services, which ultimately is what this podcast is about, and that is legal education. So Legal Ed Council, which I used to be the young lawyer liaison to, not in the non-voting position. So I'm still very interested in legal education. And I even authored some resolutions adopted by the Young Lawyers Division in the ABA about this exact topic. And that is the section of Legal Ed called for comments regarding fully online law schools being accredited. Right? And at least my perspective is then it allows for competition and innovation and disruption. And the people who still want the in-person experience and are willing to pay 2 to 3 times the price to do that can go do that. But now you open up this opportunity for way more people to come into the profession, because in my opinion, and I give this in my CLE on the subscription model, it, who's going to want to build time, work 7 days a week, 80 to 100 hours, when all these other industries are adopting Gen AI, 4-day work weeks, and all these other things, and law school is so expensive? Well, maybe somebody still will if, online law school becomes a thing and it's only cost you, $50K to go to law school and get your JD. But then even more so when you're not billing your time. So it's sort of a combined thing. But just you're in academia. What is your perspective on this online law school thing?
It's interesting because I think in the last, let's say, 4 years, and let's say we start with March 2020 as our starting point, but I think we've started to, and Gen AI adds to this. I tell my students, I said, AI takes us to the most fundamental questions, like really quickly. And I told them, like, last year I taught the AI in law class, I said, I decided it was actually about trust was actually the topic of the course. But so we realize we have these incredibly dysfunctional systems and very complex systems that interrelate, and they're not working very well at all. And we kind of make a little change here at one point, and we get unintended consequences. And so I think legal education is a difficult place because I don't think it's matching very well with what the students want or expect to the extent they can articulate that, because sometimes they're not able to do that. But they do know they want to get good jobs at the end, right? So that's a pretty straightforward goal. We have the student silo, we have the law school silo, we have the legal employer silo, we have the bar examiner silo, and we have all these different things that just don't work together.
Right.
And there are gigantic changes coming to the bar exam. And so now the bar exam is out of alignment with and will become even more so with the standard way that law is taught. That we have we learned over the last 4 years that people, actually do prefer different ways. And they have all these events outside of education. So I'm teaching in class at University of Michigan, and they are like 150% committed to in-person education. Like, basically, students have to scan a QR code to prove they were in class, right? And they can't attend a class by Zoom in real time. And you're like, I don't think that's really one of the lessons we learned from the COVID period.
Right.
And I think we're stepping back on that. But I think that each piece of the puzzle it was out of whack, and that we don't have that sort of, I think you referred to as a source of truth that can kind of tell us where to go. Like, there were changes in the U.S. News and World Report of rankings, like how they scored it. That had unexpected impacts on schools that don't make any sense. And you're thinking about the online schools. It's like you have all the law schools very worried about accreditation from the ABA. And I'm like, tell me that the ABA, which, you and I know something about how it works, is going to tell Harvard Law School they're unaccredited for doing anything, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so I'm like, the law schools need to throw their weight around. And we have that fundamental issue, right, where you say, like, if I graduate from a law school, why am I not able to practice law? Why am I taking this bar exam that's designed, to allow only a limited number of people through, and has a terrible history, to it? And then why can't I, as I think people are used to today, why can't I go out and learn this stuff on my own? I mean, it's just law. It's not like rocket science, and I passed the bar exam. Shouldn't I be a lawyer? And so, and it's hard to say, we have these institutionalized things. It's hard to make those changes. So my usual, and I don't think this is a cop out because I think it's the right answer, but it does sound like a cop out. Is I tell my students, I said, my generation, and arguably the one above it, is, but I'll just speak for my generation. We kind of made this big mess, and we can't really figure out. We want to admit it, but we can't figure out how to fix it. But your generation can. And we need to help you in some way, but we need to basically get out of your way. We can't say like, oh, look, there are no jobs because I have this, like in academia, like if you look at the tenured faculty, they they're older than retirement age typically,
Right.
and then it's hard for young professors to get into it. So you don't see that novelty. And then like I said, with the bar exam, US News and World Report, that's going to go more to this back to basics approach in legal education, which makes it harder to do more innovative things. And then you would say, I believe, as I would, that what if you had people who were doing these really innovative things in law and they were able to create a law school that did all this cutting edge stuff that people are interested in, tried new ways and did all of that, delivered it online, scaled it, and kind of trained this next generation of legal professional in whatever that might mean. And could that be done? Because the benefit of that seems clear, but under the existing structure, it seems impossible at the same time.
Right. There are more incubators for law firms than there have ever been. And while the ABA doesn't offer one, and I think it should, I think they could charge for it because the other places do. The Chicago Bar Foundation's incubator, the Justice Entrepreneurs Project is a really great one. I've had a lot of people on the show who have come through that program. Um, there's a need to like learn how to start a law firm. And talking about U.S. News, the law schools are not incentivized to teach lawyers how to start their own law firm, not because it has nothing to do with the bar exam, but because the rankings, like they want and to be able to say, look how many people we placed in jobs. But it is easier than ever, especially because of the pandemic and because of Gen AI even more so, to just start a law firm really affordably. Like it cost me $5,000 my first year. And that is cheaper than ever to start a virtual law practice. And the technology tools are super cheap these days. You don't have to use legal tech. I do, but I didn't when I got started because it was too expensive. And so it's just cheaper than ever. And, the big law firms don't want the associates to figure that out too, because they're the ones billing all the time. And so you've got the big law and the law schools that are not preparing lawyers for like a real viable option of just going and starting your own practice. And when I speak to law students as like a guest lecturer, I'll tell them, I'll ask, are you afraid Gen AI is going to destroy the job market? And of course, a lot of them raise their hands. I'm like, well, you shouldn't be, because if you learn how to use it, you could graduate and you could be at the level of a fifth-year associate and have that kind of output, because some of these legal specific AI tools that law firms are paying for, that I'm paying for, are that good if you know how to use it and you learn how to use it, which also means you can go into business for yourself and have skills that law school didn't teach you if you learn how to use these tools. So that's where I see the profession going. And I think we're going to see a massive disruption in big law once more people discover this.
Yeah, and it's weird because when I talk to students, when you talk to young lawyers generally, their mindset is still like, I'm going to do litigation. I'm going to do real estate law. I'm going to do this. I'm like, I don't even understand what that means anymore. But I say, look at these incredible, niche practice opportunities. Like I was talking to somebody last week about digital estate planning and digital probate. Incredible opportunity. You just look at the population and what's happened with COVID. The elder law practice is it has nowhere to go but up, and it's not serving the population,
Right.
And that is a very difficult issue. And if it's just, and then traditionally it's like estate planning lawyers, when they've gotten older, have turned to elder law, but then unfortunately they become elderly, and so that brings us it's its own set of issues. And then you say, like, typically the client in elder law situations, not in the traditional sense, but the actual interface is going to be children. And
I
so
have
it's
no, that's a great point, and, I don't really think of it, although I did have to take an elder law CLE recently, for Illinois, because I found that, well, first of all, elders are typically on a fixed budget, so huge latent legal market opportunity there because they don't have a lot of money to spend, and the ultra wealthy elders, sure, they're out there, but they've got lawyers.
right.
So I found that my clients who are middle-aged but have aging parents have even wanted me to do like some of the simple estate planning work just for their parents who never had it done. They need powers of attorney as they start to go and all these things. And I charge $400 for my subscribers to do that because it's all automated. And sure, we customize it a little bit, but when you have a very simple estate, you need a simple estate plan. It doesn't need to take very long, and it's better than nothing. And if somebody has a custom thing, they want to spend a lot of time, they want to do all that, they could go to the attorneys that start at $1,500 for a simple estate plan. They could go do that. Those attorneys are out there. But I have to have them sign a conflicts waiver and all that because I'm coming in like already representing the kids, and now they want me to help their mom or their dad with something. But I don't know. I'm still trying to do too much personally. But if somebody just wanted to just do that, I could tell you from personal experience, there is, at least in Illinois, I got to imagine everywhere else, huge market opportunity with elder law, with the latent legal market, in particular with elder law. Yeah.
Yeah, I once
Great insight.
went in the early days of blogs, I had somebody who's an estate planning lawyer who said, I don't get blogs at all. Like, what could I possibly use it for? Or even email newsletter. And he's like, my clients aren't even on the internet. And I go, you're going to the wrong audience. Like, what you need to do is a newsletter or a blog that's directed to children living out of town away from their parents, because they have the hardest issues. And then what you are providing is not like, oh, here are these legal things, because the legal things are sort of straightforward. But if you say like, here are support groups, here are here are ways to find an expert on, evaluating whether somebody needs to go in a nursing home versus extended care, those sorts of things. I said, if you did that, which this guy didn't do, by the way, I said, I think you would develop this really nice elder law practice, but the focus would be on the children, and especially children who live out of state, who, that's a very difficult situation to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. We could keep talking forever. I'm going to start wrapping up the interview.
Okay.
We'll just have to have you back. But I do want to end with a question I like to ask all my guests, which is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
These days, well, first of all, I don't eat red meat. So this is like an interesting question for me. So it's not a sandwich to me because it's not on something I would even consider. This is the sort of thing where this is like a good test question for generative AI. It's like, like if you ask it, like, is it a sandwich and why, or why is it not, would actually be kind of an interesting experiment. But I've always traditionally thought of it as being a sandwich. So, I don't think it's its own category. Hot dogs, hamburgers, they go together.
Yeah. Okay, great. We'll accept it. And I'll tell you, on the date of recording. So if the really dedicated listeners want to figure out when we recorded, episode 59 went live with Paxton AI. And funny enough, what they did post-interview is they put it into their tool. Is a hot dog a sandwich? So not just generative AI, but from a legal perspective. And they put like, what, according to New York law, is a hot dog a sandwich or not? And that is, so go to episode 59, and in the show notes, there's a link to that blog post where they show Paxton's legal analysis on is a hot dog a sandwich in certain jurisdictions. It's really great.
That's a great law student thing where you go to help them realize about regulations, where you go like, okay, so what is something milk or not? Like, why can't they say almond milk? Why does it have to be almond beverage product, kind of thing.
Right. Like I've been asking this question for a lot, for years to my guests, and I've never thought that there is an actual legal answer, right, to that question. Isn't that something?
And it will vary from state to state, I'm sure.
And the answer varies. It depends is the ultimate. I don't let people get away with it. Depends on the show, but yeah, I mean that is.
And there's probably this fascinating history of like why the law got enacted and who it was protecting and who they were trying to keep out of the market.
Right. Big Sausage wanted to make sure it was you know, something like that, right? Or a brat isn't a hot dog, so one is a sandwich, one isn't. I don't know.
Or
Anyway, though,
or the variant on that, which also people struggle over, is like, why do hot dog buns come in packages of 10 and hamburger buns come in packages of 8? So that will give your audience something to think about. So.
Oh, look, I just got that. For those who want to see the video, subscribe to the Substack, lawsubscribe.com, and click subscribe, and you'll see I just accidentally activated one of Zoom's thumbs up features. So stick around for a minute, but we'll sign off. Where can people get in touch if they want to reach out?
Well, I like people to look at what I'm doing at Michigan State Center for Law, Technology, Innovation, and that's just a simple Google search to see some of the things that we're doing in legal education and innovation. And then most everything, I've basically tried to create a monopoly on the name Dennis Kennedy over the years. So DennisKennedy.com, and my blog is under my name as well. LinkedIn these days is probably the best. I'm trying to exit from Twitter, and almost completely successful at that. But so I think LinkedIn is going to be the place where I end up primarily, and it's happy to connect with people, and that's an easy way to reach out to me.
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it was great. Really fun.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email Kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.